Today we're going to do technical interviews. From also, anything from general things to also a bit more specific advice, and we'll get to that. First, I'll walk you quickly through the agenda. So first, I'll do a quick intro. Then I want some things to talk about, to know about tech interviews, how they might be a little different than some people expect. Then different types of tech interviews, and I'll go into a bit more what I do. And then how to prep, the technical skills, the soft skills, and MISC, right, other stuff. Then I want to talk about the right interviewing mindset. And then I want to go through the last things, such as the day of the interview. If you maybe can establish a routine for that. Some advice about that, I think what I work when I've talked to successful candidates, like what do they do, these kind of things. And then after the interview, and then some general thoughts in the very end. Cool. So hi, I'm Leo. I work as a data scientist at Avanade. Avanade is a Accenture and Microsoft daughter, and I work mostly as a consultant. Currently have Microsoft as a client, and I also work on an internal project. I also do the Avanade internal and part of the Accenture data science training. That's anything from conceptual stuff to specific tools. And I also do interviews for Avanade. I do the technical interviews, the on-site interviews for the West region. So I don't do the culture interviews, so I can't tell you too much about that, but I can tell you about tech interviews and on-sites and these things, as from an interviewer's perspective, right? Cool. I'm a former Sharpest Minds mentee, and now I'm a mentor at Sharpest Minds. I love Sharpest Minds. I hope you all do. I'm still trying to learn and as much as I can and teach as much as I can. And if I get something wrong, just tell me. I'm still learning, as I hope we all are. So I also encourage you to just interrupt me and ask me questions and connect with me. Ask me to go more in depth, or send me a message about other content that you'd like to see, or things you find interesting, or specifics about what it is like in consulting, or what it is like starting in data science and now leading little teams, or something like that. Whatever, you just ask me if whatever is interesting to you. Okay, so first thing first, a tech interview is not like an academic exam. So there's many differences here, and I just want to point this out because this isn't always as obvious, and some of these things I think I didn't know when I was interviewing for my first role as a data scientist. So first one is you're not facing an examiner, you're facing interviewers know their role well enough to cooperate with you. You want to cooperate with the interviewer, right? This isn't cheating. This is what everyone should do, is you should ask. You should ask for clarifications. You should ask if you're on the right path. You should clarify all the assumptions. You need to communicate well and clearly, and ideally a lot of the time, right? You can say things like, that's an excellent point, let me think for 30 seconds, or let me just think for 30 seconds, but don't go mute for a long period of time. It doesn't matter if that's a coding interview, or it doesn't matter if that's an on-site. If you just go mute and don't say anything, I, as the interviewer, don't know what's happening. It your thought process, and you want to do that for several reasons. One is it's something I'll be testing you on, and I think I know other interviewers test that too, as in, how do you think about the problem? Are you on the right path? If you're not communicating, if you're not cooperating with me, it makes it harder for me to help you. And a good interview wants to help the candidate in a fair amount of way, but nothing is forcing us to. As in, if you're not open to receiving help, you probably won't receive help. So make it easy for them to help you. And that is by communicating a lot, by clarifying assumptions, by asking questions, right? Cool. Another thing I want to point out is you can say, I don't know, and it's not a game over, right? I think I've heard this before from mentees, and I've seen that happen in interviews. So someone thinks, oh, they didn't know some detail, and now it's over. It's not, right? No one will know everything in data science. No one will ever know everything in machine learning. And also, you're probably, at this stage, not applying for the technical director or data science lead or whatever. It's clear most times you will know less about the specifics than the interviewer, right? So it's fine to say, I don't know the specifics about this, but I know something in this order. And that's a great approach. You can salvage a lot of points like that. The other thing I want to say is there isn't really any points, right? As in the end, you need to convince the other person that you're good enough to do the job and that you're pleasant enough to work with. Again, I won't be there to evaluate your cultural fit. But of course, if I think there's a huge red flag on the cultural side, I will raise it, right? And in the panel or whatever in a later stage, I will say so. That being said, though, if you give me the feeling, oh yeah, that's someone I'd really like to work with, that's a really, really good sign. Makes me a lot more likely as the interviewer, or whatever the schema is that they have for evaluating candidates, right? Cool. Another thing I want to tell you is that you can take charge of situations, you can drive, regardless of the interview. As in, you can be like, hey, actually, I have a thought here. Maybe you can do this and that. You can and probably should do that. Show initiative, show motivation. Don't be passive. And I know this comes harder for some people than others. And later on, we'll go through some things that I think might be able to help with that sort of mindset, that sort of attitude, that sort of energy. But it's something you should aim for as much as you can be comfortable with. But we'll get to that in a bit more later. These are just some points I want to point out now, but it'll be more along the line of how, interview is a kind of like a special word on its own, right? Maybe especially tech interviews and on-sites and things. Cool. As you know, there's different.
A quick question, sorry, Leo.
Yes.
I was just wondering on the last slide.
Yes.
I love the point about I don't know, and I'd love to get your insights on any strategies that you have for saying I don't know in ways that, let's say, don't make you seem ignorant. I know a lot of people have that anxiety if they say I don't know, how's it going to be interpreted? Like, what are some of the ways that you found most effective to communicate that when you're not sure?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. I was going to go through it at a later point, but let's do that right now. So, look, the mindset to go into an interview is you won't know everything about machine learning or data science. You should be, and this is something I'll highlight on again later too, you should be confident in what you know and confident in what you don't know. And you should be confident, like really confident about that, as in it's completely fine to not know everything, right? If you say, I don't know the whole time, then obviously you just don't know what you're doing, right? If you said that at every question, then you're just not qualified at this stage, right? But if there's a specific question, say for example, and I had this recently with someone I did a practice interview with, and I think that person did it really well in that regard, is I asked them something about a specific algorithm, right? And I asked them, hey, can you explain the fundamentals of that algorithm to me? And that person said, well, I can't, right? But I know where that algorithm is used. I know what alternatives they are. I know da-da-da. If you get to the point where you don't know something, admit it, concede it. Do not try to bullshit your way out. It just won't work 99% of the time. And if it doesn't work, that's a huge red flag to me. And I'm sure it is to other interviewers too. So what you can try to do, and what I strongly encourage you to do, is know what you know and know what you don't know. And if you know what you don't know, but you know what you know, you can pivot from the things that you don't know to the things you know better, right? So for example, I ask you about DB scan, and you say, well, I'm sorry, I don't know the fundamentals of DB scan. I know it's a clustering algorithm, and I know it can do this. That K means clustering can't, right? For example, it can do other shapes that aren't, as concentric. It's not, it can find different sizes. It can do noise. These kind of things. That means that, to me, it's a great sign because A, you can communicate to me what you don't know, but B, you know things. Awesome. You need to know things for the job. And you are confident enough to tell me that you don't know things, and you're confident enough to tell me what you know. So the strategy should be, you know what you know, and you know what you don't know, and you should find a path, if you can, in the time given. It's not always going to work, and sometimes you're just going to say, I don't know. I'm completely out of my depth here. And that's say so, concede it. And if you don't find anything that you say but, then that's fine. Like let's hope that there's another avenue to success later on, but just concede at that point, right? That's fine. And you should also develop the mindset that shouldn't derail you, right? It's not an academic exam. You need to reach a certain percentage to pass a technical interview. You need to convince the person that's interviewing you that you're competent enough and a pleasure enough to work with. So I hope that was helpful. We're going to go through a little more detail on that later on. Jeremy, is that more or less?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thanks, Leo. Appreciate it.
Okay, cool. And also, any questions, just either interrupt me or type a chat message. I can't see the chat right now. So, Jeremy, if there's chat messages, just let me know.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And any other questions, just interrupt me. But yeah, that was an excellent question. Cool. So there's different types of tech interviews, right? This first is tell me about your project. This is omnipresent, happens all the time. It's crucial. If you don't have the experience of a past role, this is the question they'll ask. Otherwise, it's tell me about a past role in data science and so on, right? But let's just assume it's tell me about your projects, a project that you did, etc. Then there's coding interviews, data challenges, there's conceptual challenges, and all of the above and none of the above, right? What I personally end up doing a lot is I try to have a conversation with the interviewee. And I aim to just dig deep in all the different topics to find out where the limit is. And then, kind of navigate from there. I'll do my research, as I think most interviewers do, on the candidate. And I'll find out what they specialize in, what they know, what they don't know, kind of from the CV and, from the feedback from the prior interview rounds. As I do the tech interviews, there's already the screens happening before they get to meet. And so I'll aim to tailor that. But not every interview is like that, and I'm sure every interview is different. But we'll go through a bit more detail for the different kinds of interviews in a bit. Cool. So how do you prep for the technical skills? Well, there are still coding interviews around. Coding interviews might be data challenges, might be just vanilla Python, might be aim for a different library. And no matter what interview you're, that's not entirely correct. If you think it's likely that this coding challenge, plus it really doesn't hurt, there's great ways to practice Python, which I think most of you will be interviewed in. If it's not Python, then practice the language that you'll be interviewed in, R, PySpark, Scala, whatever it is, right? Code Wars, HackerRank, LeetCode. And practice that. Practice data manipulation, these sort of things, right? Kaggle comes to mind, these sort of things. I want to say that you should aim to practice in the right environment. What I mean by that is a couple of things. First is try to have the same space, because it's a certain situation right now where you probably won't have on-sites for a while, right? I mean, I'm based in the US, but I assume on-sites as in like in the office. So you'll probably be somewhere remote, right? So aim to have a space where you can practice in. There'll be the space that you also have to interview in, right? So that you won't be distracted by different surroundings at that day. That's just some science that goes into it that shows like you should not mess with the external variables like that when it comes to that. Also, check out CodaPad, because that's a common interviewing tool. It's a website where the interviewer and interviewee can code at the same time, and there's no autocomplete and things like that. So if you have some experience with that, that can probably help. Cracking the Coding Interview is a book really famous in the software engineering world, and that has very useful stuff in it. Don't aim to be able to answer all of it. That's you probably, I mean, if you can do that, you can find a job as a software engineer, and that's also great if you want to do that. But just pick and choose, but it's just another great resource out there. Another thing I want to say is, and that goes hand in hand with cracking the coding interview, is that there is great sources on YouTube of people doing coding interviews and putting them online, like some engineers from Google and that kind of stuff. You can find that stuff. And you can ask other mentees, ask your mentor for help. You can ask other mentors for help. And you can practice with them, and that's fantastic too. You also should practice. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask a question about that. So one question that I've seen come up a lot with mentees is like, the mastering, or sorry, what is it? Cracking the coding interview, LeetCode, HackerRank, all that stuff. Like, it's hard to know how much you need to know, especially for like data science type roles where that's not going to be your full thing, but you have to do some of it. Do you have any?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not an answerable question, but do you have any hints about maybe what types of coding interview questions you should be optimizing for?
Yeah, great question. Is first of all, caveat, I don't know what it's like at other companies, and I don't know, there's difference everywhere. What I think you should be always comfortable with is, if you're coding in Python or whatever languages, the basics, such as know your loops, know your dictionaries, know your, if it's a question that could have pandas, if it's a data challenge, know your pandas well, know these sort of things. But basics of complexity, space, and time complexity, but don't aim to be at the level that where you can do. I mean, some people can. It's fantastic. That's a bonus point, but I don't think you need to know all the space and time complexity to the dot where oh, you can refactor this to be, I don't know, some arbitrary data structure that no one ever uses except once in a blue moon to do coding challenges. So know the basics. Know what's the time complexity of a nested for loop. What's it if you do what's the time complexity of factorials, right? I'm sorry, of permutations, factorials, and these sort of things, and then again, be able to talk a bit about that. And if you're not that confident with the whole vast universe of that, say that. Like I don't know the ins and outs of all time and space complexity things, but here's what I know. I know that this would be a brute force approach. This would be, n squared because I'm using a nested for loop. This would be just I'm just getting information from a hash table. So that's and one. So these sort of things. I think the bigger thing to focus on is practice debugging, right? What happens when you get stuck? And that's just practice, right? Because that'll happen probably. And don't shy away from brute force approaches, right? In a coding interview, you should often ask, hey, should I do a brute force approach first? Here's my approach to a brute force approach, right? You communicate that beginning of a coding interview. Okay, here's my brute force approach. Here's what I would do. It would probably be n squared because I'd have to use a nested for loop. I think there can be a better approach using a hash table. Should I code out the brute force approach first, right? No premature optimization, right? Build something that works first and then work from there. And if you get stuck, fix it. And then in the end, maybe you can have time for a better solution. If you don't have time for a better solution, show that you know a way to a better solution. And if not, ask, hey, what would be some way where I optimize? I think I might have an idea. This might be a bottleneck, these sort of things, right? Again, your problem-solving skills is what getting tested. Your communication skills is what getting tested. So you want to communicate what you know, what you don't know, and where you're stuck, right? So there's different specifics for different companies. If you also know it's a NLP-heavy company, focus on things that go with that, right? Ask before the interview what will be asked as well, right? In the preparation for the interview, maybe they can tell you, oh, we're just going to test vanilla Python. Maybe they can tell you, hey, yeah, it's going to be a data challenge, mostly pandas. They can tell you that, but you can just ask. It doesn't hurt to ask, right? So, but I know how it is. You could study this for 3 years and still not know everything, and so it's a bit of a crapshoot too at times. But the basics, Python basics and debugging skills is what I would look for. I think that is a good, first direction.
Awesome. Thanks, Leo.
With that goes that some coding challenges are like brain teasers more than their coding challenges, right? I don't like them as much because I don't know what that's testing in time, but yeah, for that's also just a matter of question. That's a question of pattern recognition, and you'll study that by doing more of it, right? So, hey, this is a binary search approach, or, hey, this is a hash table approach, or these sort of things. You just study that a bit. So, and you don't need to study until your fingers and ears and eyes bleed. But know what's there and know what to ask for help for, right? I think that's a good approach. Cool. And then there's data science interviews, which are more conceptual, right? Where you're like, hey, if you were given that sort of data set, what would your steps be? How would you go about it? Here, again, it's crucial for you to ask the right questions. It's crucial for you to be in the right mindset. It's crucial for you to have thought about this scenario before. So, okay, so this is the data set. Ideally, you've done the research about the company too, and you kind of know what they're interested in, right? So you're like, hey, this is the kind of data we probably want to collect from the users. So we want to, this we probably collect it this way and that. And then this strategy could be, hey, we first apply this and then that. And you can practice that. You can practice that with other mentees, with your mentor. You can practice that by, if it's a medium to bigger size company, you probably have some speakers somewhere there to give some presentations. Watch them, right? See what they're about, and then understand the product and practice talking like that, right? Cool. Of course, you want to know the basic concepts of data science and machine learning, and you study them in all the ways that you know, right? YouTube, Coursera, Sharpest Minds, office hours, other mentees, your mentor. There's lots of resources. This could be a whole office hour on its own. But one thing I want to say about studying is you should study efficiently, and I want to spend 2 minutes talking about this. And you should not cram last minute, and I'll go into more reasons about that. But one thing I want to highlight real quick, if you're not aware of, is the Feynman technique, which is you study and then you explain the concepts slowly in plain English to yourself. That achieves two things. First is you really test your own understanding. Like, there's a lot of science that goes into it. I'm not going to deep dive into it, I promise, right now. But the other thing it practices is you keep talking about this concept. Sometimes you won't have someone to study with. Sometimes you do, and then you should take advantage of it. But then you talk about these concepts. And if you can explain something complicated in simple words, you've understood it, right? If you can teach it, you understood it. If you can teach it to yourself, you're on a really good track, right? Anki is another tool I want to mention. Anki is a flashcard tool. Spaced repetition is an amazing tool. Another Sharpest Minds mentee pointed it out to me a long time ago. Love it. More for facts than conceptual stuff. You can tweak it to also study a bit of conceptual stuff, but there are lots of cool tools out there, and you should aim to study efficiently because you want to prepare for an interview specifically, but you also want to prepare for the baseline for all interviews, right? And so you shouldn't just, after each interview, have to restudy parts that you already studied. You want to study for long-term retention, right? Cool. Okay, then there's ways how you prep your soft skills. Those are important, all right? You're going to be in an interview, and you want to sell the best version of yourself. And you want to communicate clearly. You want to be able to ask the right questions. You want to seem like someone they want to work with, right? How do you prep for that? Well, you practice interviews with other mentees and your mentor. There's also free other tools that you can use. They can be shared. You can also practice doing some presentations. You can do that sort of thing. And the thinking that I want to highlight here is you should be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because let's face it, an interview situation is a high pressure situation. 99% of the people get nervous during it, right? That's normal, it's fine. But you can prepare for that. You can prepare for being uncomfortable, and you can get more comfortable with that feeling. You can decrease the likelihood of getting derailed by that, right? It can still happen, and it happened to me, right? And it probably will happen to me again, right? Where you just nerves will screw you over, and then you shouldn't be too hard on yourself and just aim for the next interview, right? But you can decrease the probability of that happening by preparing and training these sort of muscles. You do that with different strategies. You can do that with, question rounds of other mentees. You can do the study sessions where you rapid fire questions at each other. These are sort of things that you can do. And also do presentations and do things that make you uncomfortable, right? For many people, that is presentations, and presentations is another phenomenal tool to increase to grow your skill in talking about data science concepts, right? So two birds, one stone kind of thing. But maybe you can go to meetups, and if you're more on the introverted side, you can force yourself to more interact with those people, to speak more with them. This will grow the muscle of being uncomfortable with these kind of situations, because an interview situation is a lot like that. So you can grow these kind of skills around it, right? There's no magic involved here. Not everyone is born. There's a lot of introverts in data science. There's a lot of super smart people who are very uncomfortable with this. If you are, that's okay. There's ways you can grow that skill set to the point where you'll be successful, right? But it's important to know that that's something you can work on, and it's not impossible to work on it. It comes easier for some people than others, but be aware of it. There's public speaking classes, do presentations, speak up in front of a crowd, these sort of things, right? And they'll help. Cool. There's the MISC part of how to prepare for an interview. First thing is you should sign up, purchase the product, interact with the product, whatever it is. Get to know the product that the company is doing as much as you can. Sometimes that's not possible because it's a B2B product, or there's things that just make it impossible, but that's the unlikely scenario. Likely scenario is it is possible, and then you should absolutely do it. Spend some money on it if necessary. It'll be a good investment. But do your research. Know the product, right? if it's an interview with Facebook, get a Facebook account. Do different things on Facebook, sign in, sign up, like create a whatever, try to like see what you would improve as a user, right? Try to understand the product a bit, because a data scientist, most of the times, has to have a good understanding of the product. And this will be these things can come up. So understand the product as much as you can. For that, it's also helpful to read reviews if there are some available, right? What are the pain points of customers? If you know the pain points, you know what you could do research on. You know something that they are probably already working on, and you could show that. If you can show that, hey, you've done your homework, you score. If you show that you think the right way, you have a product mindset, you think about the problems that the business wants to solve, that's awesome, right? So do that kind of stuff. Also helps to know a bit about the company culture. If it's, I don't know, a finance company, maybe wear a suit. If it's a tech startup in San Francisco, probably shouldn't wear a suit. But just these small nubs that you can turn that might not, be the most important things, but they might make you feel better because you've done your homework, which is great. And they also just increase the probability, and if it's only by a small amount, to just leave a good impression, right? Cool. So you want to do a lot of research, not just the company, but also the team that you'll be working on if you have that information. If not, that's something you can ask in the screens, right? Hey, what's the team like? Who's the manager? Who's the lead? What's the company structure like? Who do they report to? These sort of things are excellent questions to ask. Ideally, you will have asked them before the tech interview. But if you know that stuff already, you can be more strategic in the tech interview, right? So do your homework when it comes to that. Also, do your research on an interview. If you find out an interviewer is a former Sharpest Minds mentee, maybe there's a way you can connect with them, because in the end, you're going to interview with another person. You want to impress another person. And if you can connect with the other person, it's always good, right? Also, if you see something like, oh, that person has a strong econometrics background, or has a PhD in whatever, machine learning, NLP, whatever, maybe you can study a bit of that and, say, oh, I'm also really interested in that. And I saw when, that you'd done, published a paper or whatever, and, I'm trying to learn this. I'm not an expert in it, but, again, aim it to be a conversation, aim to leave a good impression, show that that's someone you want to work with, right? So these are kind of the MISC part. Also prepare questions for the interviewer, right? The end of the interview, you probably have some time where it's like, hey, do you have any questions for me? You always want to have questions until the time's up, right? Prepare some questions. This can be general stuff. Questions aimed to connect with the interviewer. These can be questions, aimed to understand their stack. Oh, something else I want to highlight. Do your research on what stack the company uses, Stackshare.io. Find out what they use, and ideally get an idea, and then maybe they'll give you some guidance in an interview. Maybe they'll be awesome to drop, like as in, hey, you guys are using Spacey. I've done a class on Spacey. I love it. I've used this in a project where blah, blah, these sort of things, right? Cool. So prepare questions for the interview. These don't have to be about the stack or the company. They can also be like, hey, what made you join here? Or is like, what you like, what don't you like, or these sort of things, right? Just always have questions prepared, because if you don't have questions prepared, that definitely sends the wrong signal, right? Because that just doesn't maybe not show the right level of interest and that sort of thing. And this might seem funny, but as a preparation for an interview, do other interviews, right? Don't do the interview for your favorite company first. Do that after you've done some other interviews, right? That the best practice for interviews is other interviews. Every interview is going to be different than each other, but you'll grow some experience and you'll grow some of these muscles that we've talked about, right? Not just the technical skills, but the soft skills, the mindsets kind of things. So I've spoken a bit about the mindset. Let's talk a bit more about that, because I think that is really, oh, a question. Oh, I thought I heard someone unmute themselves. If you have questions, interrupt me at any time. Any questions now? No? Okay. Hope that's a good sign. So the interview mindset. So you want to sell the best version of yourself, right? So you want to be prepared. You want to be communicative. You want to be approachable. You want to just be social enough and that sort of thing. It still has to be yourself, right? You can learn from other people, but you can grow your own style, right? You can't do an interview and not be yourself. Be yourself, right? Try to be as confident as you can. Sometimes that's something you build up over time, but I think practice helps you be more confident. And especially if you're good with the fact to say, I don't need to know everything, but here are some things I really know, right? And if you don't know something, hey, whatever, maybe, it's something of the things you should have known, maybe it isn't, but know the things that you do know and be confident about both sides, right? I think that will also put you in the right mindset. And then, as in, you'll never know everything, but you will know enough, right? That should be it. And it's also okay to be a little nervous. There's the point where you can be too nervous, and we should talk about that, right? Because there's the points where nerves flare up and it's gonna stop you. You're just gonna freeze. Adrenaline is too high. You have fight or flight kick in. We are still just industrial age is still very short. We're still hunters and collectors at heart, cavemen, so you will, right? Cavemen and women, right? So the fight and flight might kick in, and that's just not useful. So let's talk a bit about that, right? So it's always going to be fine to be a little pumped and a little nervous, and that's okay. But if you notice the nerves are taking over, right? If it happens in an interview, first of all, you should forgive yourself. That'll happen, right? Learn from it and try to minimize the probability if it happens again. And there are things you can work on out. We'll talk about that too. But one of the things too, if it happens to you in an interview, first of all, be aware that it happens, and then give yourself a timeout, right? Ask for a bathroom break. Go to the bathroom, splash some cold water in your face, say, it's going to be fine. Even if you screw up this interview, the world isn't going to end. There'll be other chances. There'll be other interviews. But try to calm yourself down, right? And go back into the interview and see if you can salvage it. If not, forgive yourself. Yes?
Sorry, just quick thought on that note too. One thing that I've noticed with mentees, especially as they get more comfortable with their mentors, you start to get used to that relationship and you're able to lean into it a little bit more. So although you're doing practice interviews with this mentor, and they are legitimately valuable from the standpoint of developing technical skills, you're not flexing that muscle that you referred to earlier as getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so seeking out new people who you have to impress from scratch every time, anyway, it can be just want to toss that out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's exactly the point here, right? As in, go find other mentees to do a practice interview with. There's also other platforms that you can use if you want to, find other sources and practice that. Do practice presentations. As in the interview itself, you will be a little nervous, right? And that's fine. But you should know when it's getting too much, and you will know, right? You'll know yourself, and that can happen, right? It happened to me, right? I got so nervous I couldn't do anything anymore, and it completely flooded it. Don't beat yourself up, but be aware of it and try to then work on that a bit, right? So if you know this could be a problem, train that muscle, as Jeremy said, right? Just find other people to work with, put yourself in uncomfortable situations, such as giving a presentation to the Sharpest Minds community, or recording yourself is another great thing. But train that. It's exactly not the same as if you do the 10th interview with someone that you know, and push yourself to those limits, and then see if it gets better over time, right? If it happens the first 2 or 3 interviews, okay, right, it happens. You'll learn, you'll grow, right? If it continues to happen, let's work on it. Find some help, right? Get people to work with you on that, and but just be aware that that's something that's not that uncommon, right? And you get people who are super senior who really know this stuff, who get really nervous in an interview. It happens. I interview senior people, and I've seen senior managers completely fumble it just because of their nerves, right? That just happens. Just so it's completely fine in an interview to say, I'm sorry, can I have 30 seconds to think about it, right? Just let me think about it for a moment, right? Take that time to just say, okay, you're panicking. That's okay. Take a few deep breaths and see, you know that stuff, right? Okay, what was the last thing? Let's go back to that. Talk to yourself, calm yourself down. You can take a bit of time for that. That's completely fine. They don't know what you're thinking about. Go to the bathroom maybe, right? Take a break like that. That's completely fine, right? I encourage to do that, right? Especially if you need to go to the bathroom. You shouldn't sit there going like, no, just take that break. It's completely fine, right? Just be aware of that. If that's something you need to work on, don't be shy to ask for help. People will help you, and work on that. It's something that can screw up interviews for you, and it's okay if it happens every once in a while. If it becomes a recurring problem, you find some people to help you work with you on that. Cool. This is something that I think is also written on the Sharpest Minds cheat sheet resources, is have an abundance mindset, and that's true. Right now we're in a bit of a crisis, I think, with Corona. That's true. It's harder to get interviews. That's just a fact right now. It's harder to land a job, but there'll be more options, right? Don't ever think that this will be the last time ever you'll get to interview, right? Don't put that kind of pressure on you. That doesn't help, right? You'll probably put enough pressure on yourself as it is. It's okay. It will work, right? So know that there's other options, and probably good strategy is to first aim for the companies you're not too excited about, right? If they give you an offer, hey, you can always consider it, but first interview with the companies where you think, okay, if I screwed this up, so what, right? If you really, really want to work at, say, a healthcare company, then pick some non-healthcare companies first to interview with, and that sort of thing, right? And get a bit of experience of interviewing, that sort of thing. Cool. Also, you should try to get everything you can from each interview and learn from it, right? As in, I screwed up an interview once where I was really mad that I'd studied a library a lot, but then I hadn't studied any Python basics, and the whole interview was about Python basics, and I was just too slow. And then I got nervous and I screwed it up, right? But then I was like, okay, Python basics, you should always know them. It's fair to expect them from you. So then I told myself, okay, here's something I learned from the interview. So always know my Python basics, right? It can happen. Don't be harsh on yourself, but learn from every one of these experiences, right? Make the most of each one of those, right? Cool. Also, you should aim to be positive, right? And that's just a general thing, is go in with a positive mindset, show that you have a positive mindset, show motivation. And yeah, if you're a little nervous, it's fine if that shows. I see nervous people all the time. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't disqualify you, right? Maybe it shows that you care. Maybe if you weren't nervous at all, maybe I wouldn't trust you. Who knows, right? But just be positive, right? Just hey, I'm going to do my best. If my best isn't good enough, I'm going to learn from it. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm prepared. I've prepared a lot, and I'm going to do as well as I can. And then if you have the right energy, that shows, and shows that you're also someone to work with, someone you're probably nice to work with, right? Cool. And again, I want to highlight this: know what you know and know what you don't know. It'll make you more confident. And also, it's just, I think, a green flag, the opposite of a red flag, right? If you've explored what you don't know, it shows you've done a lot of research, because you will always find something you don't know. And I'll get to specific about that in a moment again too. Day of the interview. Hope all of this is you were already told at one point in time, but still I want to go through it real quick. You should get enough sleep. Hope that goes without saying. Some interviews can be real strenuous, some can be hours long. So be prepared. And the preparation should probably start the day before too, right? Get enough sleep. Day before, just get the last concepts in, but no last minute cramming, right? Have a checklist of the day off, as into, hey, and this might sound silly, but I have that checklist, and that's, did you have breakfast? Did you take your prescriptions? Did you do the things? Do you have your routine, right? Try to establish your routine before the interview, right? Do a warm-up. And a warm-up is something you can look at, but it's it can be different kinds of warm-up. It can be really, really quick, just very easy data thing that you prepare something. Also, do a voice warm-up, a speech warm-up, something. You'll be talking to a person, right? You'll be interacting with a person. Don't let these words be the first words that you speak that day, right? Just be a little warmed up. If you don't have someone to do that with, that's fine. There's some exercises you can do. You can look up some theater warm-up exercises, something like that. You can just give a little presentation to yourself, but do a little warm-up that you're more likely to be more consistent, more coherent, and also just warmed up, right? Good. Sound check, video check. I don't want you to go online onto the call and have to fix your audio and video for 5 minutes. That's not good. Right level of blood sugar and caffeine. Make sure you know what those are. Make sure that if you do better, if you have a big breakfast, then eat a big breakfast. Make sure if you have a small breakfast, eat a small breakfast. So whatever a meal it is, make sure that you have about a good amount of caffeine. You probably need a little less that day than you do otherwise, but if you do caffeine, if not, do whatever. And then I think something that helps me is I always try to read something funny to get in the right, like, kind of positive mood, right? Because I tend to get nervous as well. So when I'm like, I read something funny, I'm like, hey, this is good. And then, after I've done my warm-ups, I'm like, hey, no, I'm prepared. I've studied, this is good. No last minute cramming. Again, you want to study for long-term retention, and the last minute cramming is going to probably make you more nervous than it's going to help you, and you're not going to retain much of it anyway. So it's unlikely that will help you at all. It's more likely to harm you. So please don't. Cool. During the interview, ask many questions, right? Clarify your assumptions. Is that the shape of the data? Is that fair to assume from our users? Ask. Is this space-time, I'm sorry, blup, space complexity more important? I think space complexity might be more important because of this or whatever. Have a conversation, ask many questions, right? This isn't like an academic exam, it's an interview. So make sure you set up that cooperative atmosphere and make sure you clarify all your assumptions, you know what you're trying to solve, and don't get blindsided by something you just didn't ask. Or try to reduce the probability of that at least. Ask what libraries you can use, what tools you can use. If it's vanilla Python, ask, hey, can I import counter dictionaries from collections, because I think it might be useful doing that. And they say yes or no, and then you've asked, right? It could save you a lot of time. If you didn't ask and it was allowed, you just lost time there. Ask if they want you to elaborate certain points more, and ask if they look for something else, right? If they say, hey, I'm going to use this because I think this use because of X, Y, Z, would you want me to elaborate? As in, I think this algorithm will be a good fit here because of blah, blah, blah. And if they want you to elaborate, you can. Don't say that if you can't elaborate. But that's something you should do, right? Like, hey, I can elaborate on this if you want me to. And, you can ask how we're doing time-wise. Am I on the right track? Do you think this is a good idea, right? Work with them. Again, this is the point. We spoke about this already. I don't know specifically, but I know, I don't know how dbScan works, but I know k-means clustering. It's an alternative. dbScan might be better in this cases, but again, I don't know exactly how it works. And these sort of things, right? Or, yeah, I don't know that library, but I've used a similar library, these sort of things. Cool. So once you've spoken about this, I'm going to jump to the next part. After the interview, you want to write a thank you note every single time. And also, after you've calmed down a bit, you want to take notes on what you think you did well and what you didn't. What can you work on? What do you think? And after I told you went to the next round or not, you can maybe ask for some feedback. If they can tell you, they might. And ask maybe at the beginning, hey, what's it look like for feedback? You can ask that during a tech screen or at an earlier stage already. When can I ask for feedback, at which stage, et cetera, et cetera. And
quick question,
it's great.
Leo.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just about the thank you note. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm embarrassed to say I've never actually thought about this aspect before, but what specifically is it that someone gets out of a thank you note? Like, what are the things that go through, say, the hiring manager's mind after that happens?
Sorry, I think I don't know really. Sorry, but what I do know is that everyone expects one. So
okay,
I expect one because everyone expects one. So if you did an interview with me, all I want it's just a 3-liner. Hey, thank you for taking the time to interview me. I really enjoyed it. I'm excited about the position. I hope to hear from you guys soon.
so
Perfect.
It's about social signaling almost.
I think it's just a social signal. I haven't researched on why everyone writes a thank you note, but I know it's expected.
Right.
I always write them, and I kind of expect them at this point too. I'm like, if you don't write them, like, why? If it doesn't hurt, it's 2 minutes of your time. You can write them the day off or the next day, and it's also an opportunity to connect further or show that you've connected, such as, hey, and I specifically. This goes not just for tech interviews, right, but for anything, reach out messages, whatever. I specifically enjoyed talking to you about this, and I thought it was great, and I learned something about that, and these sort of things. So there's something specific that you could take away from that. Mention that, right? Just because it's another way you can connect with that person, and it shows that you have these social skills, right? That you're acknowledge that you're grateful for it, and it's social skills here. So
awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Cool. I wanted to share a bit about perspective from an interviewer, right? So for me is before the interview, I will do my research on the candidate, right? That involves going through the notes that have been taken from earlier rounds, such as the tech screen, the notes that other people took, the comments, maybe I had a call with someone before. Usually it's just maybe it's a shared document, maybe it's an email chain, that sort of thing, right? I'll go to your LinkedIn, I will go to your GitHub, and I'll look at that stuff. I'll see if you have an online presence, maybe you did some presentation somewhere. I'll see if there's some interesting stuff in your project, and I'll do my homework on you, right? And I will see what you say you're good at and what you're not good at. That's because that makes it easier for me to interview you, because I want to feel out what's the kind of depth of your knowledge in certain fields. So if you say, hey, I did a lot of clustering, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, I'm going to ask questions about that until the point where I think, okay, cool, that's the limit. Here's your point where you say, actually, I don't know the specifics about that. I've used it, but I don't know, but whatever, right? But I do that kind of homework so I can tailor my interview for you, right? And so I want you to be honest then, right? And if you're not honest, it's just a huge red flag for me. And it's something that if you're just completely dishonest, I'll just end the interview, because that would not be fit in any way, shape, or form. And it's not something that's tolerable in my eyes. So I'll give you examples, as in like any outright lies, of course, that goes without saying, but also things where where I get a bad feeling is, for example, when you put on your resume, hey, lots of experience of deep learning and TensorFlow and whatever, blah, 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 and then I ask you some TensorFlow questions, the basic ones first, and then more in-depth ones. If you struggle with the basic ones and just shows you haven't used TensorFlow, or if you just don't get deep learning concepts, because then after, I probably pivot to deep learning concepts, okay, then explain neural net, blah, blah, whatever, something like that. That just shows dishonesty, as into, hey, you say that's something you know in your CV, but it's not something you could show to me in an interview, and that's just not good, right? Everything on your CV is fair game, right? It's completely fair to say, hey, okay, I studied the basics of C++. It hasn't been a while. I've prepared Python for this interview. But if you studied C++ in the basics, then I wouldn't ask anything harder than that from that point on, and that's fine, right? It's something different than if you said, hey, I've written several programs start to finish, front end, back end, and C++, then I will ask my in-depth questions, whatever, right? Just making stuff up. But the point is, anything on your CV, you should really know your CV going in. And you should know that's fair game to ask anything about it on CV, right? About your projects, what worked, what didn't. You should be honest about it. As into, hey, what would you improve next time you did a project? I don't want to hear the project was perfect. Everything was a great success, and I do it exactly like this again. No project is ever perfect. There's always something you learn from each position, each project that you work on. There's always something to learn. If you're not that person to learn something on anything, it's a red flag to me. If you're not honest enough to tell me about your failures, it's also a red flag. I want to ask you about, hey, when did you fail, in the technical environment? When did you fail with technical challenge? Tell me about that. What did you learn from it, right? I want to hear you honestly say, hey, I tried to build something like that. It just didn't work at all. It was badly scoped, or it was the wrong choice of frame, or something like that, right? And I want you to elaborate on it, and then I want you to tell me what you learned from it. I want you to be honest about that, because that shows the kind of person that I want to work with, right? And technical interview is about your way of thinking. It's also about you. It's not just what you know technically right now, is where will you be sometime from now, right? We're investing time in you too. And if you work on my team, for example, then I want to know that if you don't know something, you're honest to communicate that. One of the things I do is the day of the interview, right? I will look up something that is impossible for you to know. I will go to ArcGIS or something. I will go to the most recent publication of some neural net, whatever it is, pick out a detail and ask you, hey, what's that detail of the newest neural net, da, 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 da. And the only correct answer is, I have no idea. I just don't know. I know the basics about, you can say that then, and you can do it, but I don't want any bullshit. So if there's a one like that, but I will ask you a question to which you don't know the answer, and the correct answer will be, I don't know. And that should give you some confidence that I don't know is not the end of an interview. It's not a game over thing. Sometimes it's the only correct answer even, right? I don't think everyone does that, but I do that for a reason, right? Because in consulting, we need to be honest, what we know and we don't know especially, right? And I need to be sure that the people that I then pass on and say, yeah, that person is solid to work with, are solid to work with. And if you're not honest that way, you're not solid to work with. So yeah, honesty is huge like that. You should know as much as you can about the role that you're applying for. Sometimes you won't get to know the details. Sometimes you can though. And then you can find about that out in technical screens. You should really know job posting, right? The job description is, you should know that. Maybe you've spoken to some of these people before, maybe you've done some research on a company, but know as much as you can, so that in an interview you can then be strategic in your approach, but also you can ask better questions at the end of the interview, and it's always a good way to leave a good impression, right? I want to see people who are motivated, right? If I feel like you don't really care to begin with, it's just something I'll raise, right? Even if you do well technically, I'm not there to evaluate your cultural fit, but if it's a clear misfit, I will have to raise it, right? Positive and confident is probably a bit overrepresented in the kind of line of work that I do. As in consulting, we just have to be a little more positive and confident than the average data scientist out there, probably. But still, I think that goes without saying that generally speaking, it's always good to have a positive approach to things, and an interviewer likes that, right? It's, yeah, let's get this done, looking forward to it. You want to know, and not be afraid to ask questions, these sort of things, right? Again, another thing is the interviewer is not your enemy. The interviewer, I've spoken to other people who interview, I've spoken to my mentor and other people and da-da-da. And interviewers, most of the time, want to help the interviewee, right? There are exceptions, and maybe you just get unlucky and get a terrible interview, and sometimes that happens, and tough luck, happens, right? Then you shouldn't be tough on yourself. Just, there's horror stories out there, right? I try not to ever be one of them, but that can happen. But most of the times, you get an interviewer who wants to help you. And if you're at the stage, for example, where you get the on-site tech screen, so say with me, right? You've already made it this far, so there's been investment in you. Interviewing people is really expensive, especially in data science, right? So, and you don't want, you have an incentive to have this to work, right? So the interviewer is not your enemy. Make them your ally, right? Establish a positive working relationship with them, and see them as such, right? Ask them for help, ask them for their opinion, right? Ask them for their input, ask them if that's on the right track, ask them for how would you do this, and da-da-da. Obviously, you want to do as much as you can on your own, but it should always be connected with what the interviewer's goals are, right? As would it be in a company, in work life too, as in, you will want to work with other people, you want to work with your manager, you want to help your manager reach his or her goals, right? So you want to have the company reach its goals. So make sure you're on the right track, get that feedback in, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I hope that's helpful so far. If you have any questions about anything, shoot them now. And I'll stop sharing.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that you go like check out people's like GitHub and like their personal website if they have
Yes,
it, or,
sir,
like,
I do.
project website. What are kind of some of the things that you're like looking for to see on their GitHub, or looking for in a project, or things that
Fantastic.
like we should
Yeah.
focus on?
Fantastic question. Clean code, data science approaches that make sense. Documentation is a low-hanging fruit where you can score a lot of points, right? If you show me that you can write documentation, you'll score very highly, right? Outline your thought process in documentation. If you're the type of person, if you believe comments are good, then write comments. Have stuff that works, right? Don't. If not, say, hey, this is currently not working because I'm working on it, right? Have good commit messages. Again, if none of this is at the stage of where it's perfect, that's okay too. If you're not applying for a senior position, I don't expect them to be at a level of where I'm, if you're not applying for a senior position, I'm not expecting them to be at that level. But many of these are probably low-hanging fruit, right? So aim for that, right? Say, hey, I use this algorithm first, then I use that algorithm, write that in the documentation, and say, I could have probably used this algorithm, but I didn't have the resources to do so. Fantastic. Or, hey, I was low on time. Also, I wanted to set myself a goal to reach something by a certain time. Write that in the documentation that shows, oh, wow, that person's even thinking in a time setting, right? Your time is a resource that maybe, hopefully, I'll be paying for. Not me, but the company, right, will be paying for. So if you know how to invest that resource and show that with your documentation in your project, fantastic, right?
Leo, when you say documentation, that means explicitly like a README file in the GitHub
Yes,
repo, right?
that,
Yeah.
yes, and also such as doc strings for functions, maybe, right? Such as this function does this and this and this and that, right? And this is the input, this is the output. Some people really believe in that. I believe in that. This is also a question of philosophy at times. Some people don't do that, and that's fine. There's different styles, but do what you think is a good style. Maybe read something like the Google style guide, right? How does Google write Python? How does Google do data science? And try to maybe emulate a bit of their style, right? See if that's something you like, or some other company like that, right? Those are things I'd be looking for. But it's a great question. Thank you.
And generally, just the mere fact of being opinionated kind of shows that you've at least put a minimal amount of thought into the fact that there exist options, right?
Yes, like, exactly, right? Just also, it is possible to see if you've put a lot of thought and work into a project, right? But it makes it easier to see that if you just do documentation of that. I'm going to spend half an hour, maybe a bit more if I'm intrigued or something on that, but I'm not going to spend days going through your repo, right? So make it easier for me to see that you're valuable, right? And documentation will help. It's just that's easy low hanging fruit, I think. Good documentation is also really hard to write. So I'm not expecting it to be awesome as anything else today, right? As in, don't aim for perfection, aim for you know what you know and you don't know, right? Just have something outlined and that sort of thing.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Thanks.
Most welcome. Are there more questions? Anything, open to any questions. Also feedback if you saw something you disagree with or just want to pick my brain, just ask me. Is there something in the chat I should look at?
Nope, this actually,
okay.
Yeah, just chat's been stuck, yeah.
Is that a good sign that there's no questions right now? Okay, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the presentation is very helpful, especially recently I gave an interview and I just, my comment is like, I wish I would have heard this presentation before. But yeah,
try to learn the lessons from that interview if it didn't go so well, and if it did go well, congrats. But yeah, it's thank you. And if you have any questions, also feel free to reach out to me, or if you want more in-depth something, or something comes up, have some time, just write me a message. You know, I'm doing this to give back to the community. It's my biggest motivation. Yeah, other questions? Someone else try to. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Leo, thanks for the presentation. Some very helpful tips there.
My pleasure.
So I might be applying for a job sometime in the near future, which is R dependent. And I haven't been working on R in a long while now, so I'm kind of rusty with it. I'm much different with Python now. I do believe that I can switch over from Python to R if needed, because the algorithms are all there in my head, and I can just Stack Overflow or Google and make do with R as well. But is that a good enough argument to make to the interviewer in case the job is clearly R dependent?
I mean, they'll definitely tell you if they do a coding interview what language it'll be in. And if it is, they say, oh no, it has to be Python or it has to be R, just practice that before the interview, right? Take some time to specifically practice that and make sure you practice it. Don't just rely on your past knowledge, because you'll forget some syntax or something. And syntax isn't usually something that an interviewer looks at too much. It's more like, what's your thought process? If you forget, oh, is a class capitalized or not in Python? You know, maybe rather you know it, but it's not like something that disqualifies you, right? If your logic is great, I'll remember that your logic was great. I won't be like, oh, you didn't know that a class was going to be capitalized, or you screwed up a dictionary index. And so I'd suggest that before the interview, find out what language the interview will be in, and they'll tell you. And then study that language, right? Don't confuse yourself.
Leo, do you think StackShare might be a good place to turn for this?
Yes, StackShare is fantastic. I hope I put that in my presentation. StackShare.
You did. I'm plagiarizing
here. So StackShare will tell you what stack they're using, right? And find out what stack the company is using. But if they do a coding on tech interview, they'll tell you what languages they use. And then I highly recommend you study that. It's a lot of Python these days, at least in the Bay Area. And data science, it's a lot of Python these days. But if it's R, then ask if you can do it in R. Maybe they can arrange that too if it's a bigger company, right? So, but be sure to be in shape in the library that you want to practice in, and not just the library, but the language too, right? So specifically take some time to study that and do a couple of hackerangs or code wars problems just to like refresh that. And also it's good for you because you'll tell yourself, oh, I know this, I remember that, I'm confident. You build up more confident like that, and that helps you going into it, right? You want to have the right mindset, and you're like, yes, I've practiced that. Don't do like what I did, study a certain library and don't study the Python basics, and then be like, oh, I should have studied the Python basics. That completely derailed me, right? It cost me. But you can avoid that. So avoid that. I hope that helped. And if it didn't, just ask another question.
No, this is helpful. Thank you.
Most welcome. More questions? Yes,
I
Chris.
have another one.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, about like take-home data science problems. It's like I've done one before, and it didn't go too good because it was a pretty difficult problem. There was like very limited time. But again, just thinking about like what you were saying in interview, like kind of showing your thought process and kind of like talking through it, so it's not just like you're sitting there in silence and a blank slate. Like, how do you kind of do that in a take-home problem, I guess? Like, how do you show how you're thinking if it's like just at the end of the day you're submitting code and maybe a few slides or something?
Yeah, documentation, comments, you can show how you're thinking with the take-home as well, right? Excellent question, by the way. Write down your thought process. Write down what you do differently if you had more time. Write down what steps to take in the future. If you just submit your code, that's all I can judge you on. If you submit a super nice presentation and not super nice long, it has to be within a time limit. But if you have a documentation, a README that walks through your thought process, then if you don't have that, I can't judge you on it. If there's things you can't communicate well in the comments, and there well might be, then put that in a documentation, right? And make sure you highlight that to them when you hand it in. Say, hey, I wrote down some of my thought process and documentation so it doesn't get missed, right?
I think also Markdown in Jupyter Notebooks can be a nice avenue too.
Absolutely, yes. That goes with it. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So kind of like, I guess with Jupyter Notebooks, like tell a story through like the progression of your
a lot of data science in many roles. Not every role out there. You might be optimizing some machine learning algorithm that, but many data scientist roles out there are a lot about communication. That's why it's important to show that in the interview. And that's why it's important to show that in the documentation and in the notebooks and that sort of thing, right? I might be a little over-indexing on that because I'm working in consulting, but I've spoken to people who don't work in consulting, and they have similar opinions. So just a little asterisk after my opinion here. But in many roles where you have to explain things to the business, communication is crucial. We have to cooperate with other teams, where you're just not. And there are roles where all you do is code, right? If you optimize some algorithm, you're on the tech team. You don't do that, and it's fine. Not everyone, so that's perfectly fine. No judgment here. But for many companies, that's not the role that you'll be applying for. So communication skills are crucial, and written communication is really important too. And you can practice that, and you can put that in a documentation for take home.
Okay, thanks.
Most welcome. More questions?
Hi.
Yes.
I had a question too. I was wondering, do you suggest any resource and like a reference for algorithms that they might ask for interview?
Yes. Specific resources. I'll get back to you on that. I'll post that in a comment about it.
Yeah, that would be great. So thank you.
I would look at general data science algorithms, right? Like clustering algorithms. I would look at the basic ones. Like I would want to know every single data scientist, to know logistic regression, right? Well enough. I would want to know every data scientist, just some of the basic ones, right? Those never hurt because it's always fair game to ask about logistic regression, in my opinion. It's always fair game to ask about decision trees, right? If it's gradient boosted algorithms, it's a few steps further than that. But if you mentioned you've used them, I can ask about that. It's fair game if it's on your CV, if it's in your project. If you use the algorithm, I will certainly ask about it, right? Because I want to know that you know what you use, right? But
yeah.
So go through the repos that you've created. look at the algorithms that you've used. Would you be able to explain to me, not in all the academic depth that ever would be possible, but would you be able to explain to me how those work, right? If you don't, maybe that's a sign that you should study them, at least to the point where you know the high level of it, right? Don't get like tunnel vision and say, oh God, no, I need to know XYZ algorithm to the finest minute detail, how it's implemented in Python, sklearn, whatever, maybe not that far, but be able to tell me, okay, this is a gradient boosted trees, here's how they work roughly, right?
And actually, just to piggyback off that, like the explanatory depth that we do in office hours when we talk about a particular algorithm, you'll notice like I never mention any equations. Like there are no equations in office hours at all, and the reason is I'm hoping to convey to folks who are there how to explain these things in a way that's compatible with the way they'll have to explain them in interviews, right? You can't run to a chalkboard and start writing stuff. You want to have a verbal, kind of very picturesque explanation in mind. So that's sort of the level of depth. If I'm reading into your answer there, Leo, that
yeah. So I want to continue that thought for a moment. So that's a great point. You want to be able to explain them without having to rely to recreation. That being said, for certain roles, you might be asked to know these equations quite well. Those might not be roles that you apply for. But if you go for a senior machine learning engineer where you see in a job description, they need to optimize some queuing or whatever, something for Lyft or whatever, then absolutely you should know the equations. So yes, for most jobs, that level of the office hours will probably, get you where you need to get, especially for junior positions, right? Again, with the little asterisk that if you go, and I know where we want to implement you is you're going to be on my team that does something that way, and we need a lot of optimization for then I think it's fair game to me to ask, okay, so here is this equation. What does it do? How does it work? Where's the bottleneck, right? These sort of things. But that is more, usually the more senior end of applications that you'll send out, and also the more specialized roles, right? The more super tech special, not the data scientist that does the more product side of things, right? So go through your GitHub, understand what you've used, be able to talk about them in a way that we do at office hours, maybe. Find some other mentees to practice up with, maybe say, hey, can I explain some things to you? Maybe, win-win, right? Can't hurt. Mm-hmm. And then I'll also get back to you, and I just posted maybe on the link to this office hours in the chat about some other links where I think that are good. But yeah, remember, right? Anything on your CV is fair game. So if you say, hey, I've used gradient boosted trees, I've used that algorithm, this algorithm, then I'll be allowed to ask for it. I think that's fair game, right? If I see random forest and I don't see gradient boosted trees, I'll be like, hey, let's talk about random forest. And have you heard of gradient boosted trees? If not, fine, let's find something else to talk about, right? I'm not that kind of interviewer, right? I'm going to find something that you can talk to me about. I'm not going to, right, beat you up and try to make you fail. That's not my incentive at all. And I don't think there's many interviewers like that. There are probably some, but right. I want to be your ally in this. So yeah, did that help?
Yeah, thank you a lot.
Cool. I'm gonna have to run. I'll have a meeting. Any last second questions? If not, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll see you in another office hours